Reading from Job chapter 30, verses 16 to 23. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. Years ago, Philip Yancey wrote a book titled, Where is God When It Hurts? He describes a visit to a friend named Douglas, who was partially paralyzed as a result of a terrible accident. After some years, he was diagnosed with a cancer that eventually claimed his life. Yancey asked him, diffident yet needing to know the answer, Douglas, don't you sometimes feel like God has let you down? After a long pause, Douglas replied, I have learned not to confuse God with life. I'm not sure life will ever be fair, but God is fair, and He's there even when life is not. That answer wasn't the cliche Yancey had expected. It was deep wisdom forged in fire. Douglas realized the same truth that Job eventually arrived at through the same painful journey of suffering. Job 29 to 37 narrates the last phase of Job's defense. He is no longer arguing with his accusers. He is now pouring out his soul aloud, remembering, lamenting, and wondering where God is amid his suffering. Chapter 29 begins with memories of his better days, when God's favor seemed like a canopy over his life. When his children were around him, his body was strong, his reputation was unshakable, and his influence undeniable. God's candle once shone upon his head. He walked in light, even when the path was dark because of God's illumination. There was no confusion then, no groping for answers. He lived in communion with God, experienced rather than imagined. But now that sense is gone. What is most striking in this chapter is not just a physical or emotional loss, it's a spiritual disorientation. God seems distant. The divine light is invisible, and the God of power is silent. The warmth of God's presence withdrawn. This is not just about suffering, it's about divine silence. Job is asking a question many of us have dared to whisper in the dark. Where is God now? He continues in chapter 30 to contrast his past glory with his present disgrace. Once the esteemed elder at the city gate, now even the lowest, most contemptible youth mock him. He is isolated, shamed, disfigured by pain, and rejected by society. They mock me in song, he says. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. And in Job 30, verse 20, he pleads, I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. I wept for those in trouble, he says. Why then is there no one to weep for me? Why doesn't God tell me what's happening? Job's prayer is not polished. He is honest, and honesty is one of the most profound forms of faith. He's not denying God. He's appealing to him. Deeply wounded, yes, but still speaking to God. That in itself is faith. Then in chapter 31, Job lays his conscience bare. If ever there was a moment to confess sin and guilt, now would be the time. But instead, Job confesses innocence, not sinless perfection, but sincere integrity. He declares he made a covenant with his eyes not to lust. He speaks of how he treated his servants with dignity, knowing that they too were made by God. He recounts his generosity to the poor, his fairness in business, his refusal to trust in wealth or to gloat over an enemy's fall. He did not worship the sun or moon as others did. His life was marked by justice, mercy, and humility. This is not pride, it's an appeal to divine justice. He calls the earth to testify to his conduct and then falls silent. His case is made. He has no more words. Now Elihu begins, a younger man, angry that Job justified himself rather than God, and also angry that the three older friends had failed to answer Job convincingly. Elihu's speeches span several chapters. While he says some things that are sound like the idea of suffering as discipline, he too misses the mark. He's repeating what's already been said, that Job must be suffering because he did something wrong. Like the others, Elihu is more committed to a tidy theology than to the complexity of divine mystery. And through all of this, through Job's pleas, the accusations of his friends, and the lecturing of Elihu, God remains silent. He will not allow Job to comfort himself with his own righteousness. As long as we are full of words, justifying ourselves, insisting on our own perspective, our ears are closed to God. Silence is not simply the absence of sound. It is a creation of space, space for God to move, to speak, to heal. Psalms 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." The Living Bible puts it even more forcefully. Stand silent, know that I am God. When Elijah was at his lowest, God made himself heard, not in the earthquake or the fire. His was the still small voice, or more literally, a sound of sheer silence. God often speaks in the silence that follows the collapse of our arguments, our reasoning, our defenses. It's after all the noise has died down that we read these words in Job 38:1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. The silence had finally made space for the divine voice. Many of us have been or will be where Job was. We may be lost in grief, wounded by circumstances, wondering where God is and why he doesn't answer. In those moments, we may be tempted to fill the silence with explanations, anger, or even attempts to justify ourselves. We may want to rehearse our righteousness or accuse God of forgetting us. But God is not absent in the silence. He is waiting for us to stop the noise and listen for him. To wait on the Lord so that we may know not the answers to our questions, but the presence of the Almighty. At the end of this journey, Job says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." God gave Job not merely second-hand understanding, but a glimpse of the divine majesty. Not just immediate relief, but seeing the God who deserves still greater reverence. So if you are hurting today and heaven seems quiet, let us know that God's silence is not a sign of his absence. His delay is not abandonment. He may be waiting, not to speak to our minds, but to reveal himself to our souls. So in our suffering, let us be still before our God and stop the whirlwind of our self-righteous arguments. Let us listen in the silence of our suffering. Then when God speaks, we will know. His voice doesn't always remove the pain, but it reorients the heart. It brings restoration, not necessarily of our circumstances, but of our soul. Let us say, as in Psalm 90:14, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Let the Lord, who once said, peace be still, speak to the storm inside you. As Zephaniah 3:17 promises, the Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing. When it hurts and all is silent, know that God is near. He is waiting for the silence to draw us closer, not to push us away. He will quiet us by his love, and that love will be enough to sustain us through life. God bless.